The Well of Secrets, Dark Echoes and Haunting Revelations Unveiled. Chapter 1. Echoes of the Past. Mark Thompson adjusted the rearview mirror one last time, casting a weary glance at the sprawling, weathered estate that lay before him. The sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows across the overgrown garden. Emily, standing beside him with a half-hearted smile, tried to appear excited, but the exhaustion of the long journey and the weight of their decision seemed to hang heavily on her shoulders. "This is it," Mark said, his voice barely masking his uncertainty. "Our new home." Emily nodded, though her eyes were fixed on the house with a mix of awe and apprehension. The once grand Victorian structure had seen better days. Its paint was peeling, revealing the raw wood beneath, and ivy had claimed much of its facade. The garden, long abandoned, was a tangled mess of weeds and wildflowers. In the backyard, a dry, cracked well stood like a silent sentinel, its stone edges broken and weathered. The couple had inherited the property from Emily's great-uncle, a distant relative they barely knew. They had hoped for a fresh start away from the bustling city, but now, as they stood before their new home, the promise of serenity seemed distant. "Let's get the boxes inside," Emily suggested, trying to shake off the creeping unease that had settled in her chest. "We'll tackle the garden later." The interior of the house was just as they had expected. Dusty, dimly lit, and filled with the musty scent of neglect. Mark and Emily began the arduous task of unpacking, their movements punctuated by the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. As they worked, the day's fading light began to cast eerie shapes on the walls, creating an atmosphere that was both intriguing and unsettling. Emily was in the middle of unpacking a box-marked kitchen when she heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper that seemed to drift through the air. She paused, holding her breath, her heart skipping a beat. The sound was coming from outside, from the direction of the well. "Mark," she called softly, but her voice was lost in the cacophony of moving and unpacking. She glanced toward the window, her brow furrowed. The whispers, though indistinct, seemed to carry a sense of urgency. "Did you hear that?" she asked, trying to sound casual as she returned to her task. "Hear what?" Mark asked, glancing up from his work. He didn't seem to notice anything unusual. "Never mind," Emily replied, shaking her head. She dismissed the sound as a trick of the wind, or perhaps her imagination playing tricks on her. She had been known to let her mind wander, especially in new and unfamiliar surroundings. As evening settled in, the house grew darker, and the once comforting warmth of the setting sun was replaced by the encroaching chill of night. The couple decided to take a break and explore the upper floors. In the attic, they stumbled upon a stack of old, dust-covered trunks and boxes. "Look at this," Emily said, her voice echoing in the confined space. She had found an old leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and worn with age. "It's from one of the previous owners." Mark took the journal from her, his curiosity piqued. He carefully opened it, revealing pages filled with cramped, fading handwriting. The entries were sporadic, often mentioning a well that seemed to hold some dark significance. As he read aloud, the words seemed to tell a story of unease and fear. "The voices are growing stronger. I fear they are coming from the well. They call to me in my dreams, and I can no longer distinguish reality from nightmare. I have hidden the truth, but it is becoming harder to keep it at bay." Emily shivered despite the warm attic air. "What do you think this means?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. "I don't know," Mark replied, closing the journal and placing it back on the dusty trunk. "But it sounds like there's something strange about that well. Maybe it's just an old man's ramblings, or maybe there's something more to it." As they descended the stairs, the house seemed to exhale a sigh of relief, the old wood creaking and groaning as if awakening from a long slumber. The unsettling feeling that had been creeping up on them throughout the day now seemed to seep into every corner of the house. The night fell in earnest, and with it came an almost palpable sense of foreboding. The wind outside began to howl, rattling the windows and creating a symphony of eerie noises. Mark and Emily lay in bed, trying to ignore the disquieting sounds from the house. The whispers, faint but persistent, continued to drift through the walls, echoing in the quiet of the night. Emily lay wide awake, her mind racing with thoughts of the journal and the strange voices. She tried to focus on the reassuring presence of Mark beside her, but sleep eluded her. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if calling her name. Eventually, Emily's fatigue overcame her anxiety, and she drifted into an uneasy sleep. The night was long and restless, filled with dreams of shadows and whispers. The voices seemed to follow her into her dreams, growing more distinct and pleading. In the early hours of the morning, as the first light of dawn began to filter through the window, Emily awoke with a start. The whispers had stopped, but the sense of unease remained. She glanced at Mark, who was still asleep, his face relaxed in a peaceful expression. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, that the well in the backyard held secrets yet to be revealed. As the sun rose, casting its light on the old house, Mark and Emily faced a new day with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. The well in the backyard stood silent and unmoving, a dark presence that seemed to loom over their new beginning. With the journal's ominous words lingering in their minds, they knew that the well was more than just a relic of the past. It was a gateway to something darker, a mystery that would soon unravel, bringing with it echoes of a past long buried. The journey into the heart of the well's secrets had only just begun, and as Mark and Emily prepared to face the days ahead, they were unaware of the true extent of the shadows that awaited them. The echoes from the well would not remain silent for long. Chapter 2: Whispers in the Dark. The first week in the old house passed in a blur of unpacking and settling in. Mark and Emily Thompson tried to adjust to their new life, but the eerie atmosphere of the estate hung over them like a persistent fog. As the days wore on, the unsettling whispers from the well grew more frequent and clearer, gnawing at the edges of Emily's sanity. Every evening as the sun dipped below the horizon, the voices would begin, a soft, mournful murmur that seemed to seep through the walls of the house. Emily, unable to ignore the growing intensity of the whispers, found herself increasingly on edge. She would hear phrases just out of reach, like fragmented echoes of a distant conversation. They seemed to call her name, or perhaps something darker, something she couldn't quite understand. Mark, on the other hand, remained steadfast in his skepticism. He attributed the sounds to the creaks and groans of an old house settling into its foundations. "It's probably just the wind," he would say dismissively. "We're still getting used to the noises of the place." But Emily's anxiety only deepened. Each night, as darkness enveloped the house, she would lie awake listening to the persistent whispers, her heart pounding in her chest. She tried to explain her fears to Mark, but his lack of concern only heightened her sense of isolation. One crisp autumn morning, Emily decided to take matters into her own hands. Determined to uncover more about the house's past, she set out to speak with Sarah, the friendly neighbor who had welcomed them on their first day. Sarah lived in a modest cottage a few houses down the lane. The cottage was neat and well-maintained, a stark contrast to the Thompsons' dilapidated estate. Emily knocked on the door, and Sarah greeted her with a warm smile. "Hello, Emily. How are you settling in?" Sarah's eyes sparkled with genuine curiosity. "We're managing," Emily replied, her voice tinged with nervousness. "But I was hoping you could help me with something. I've been hearing some strange noises coming from our well, and I was wondering if you knew anything about the history of the house." Sarah's smile faltered slightly, and a shadow crossed her face. "Oh, the well," she murmured. "That's an old story. Most people in town know about it, but few talk about it." Emily's interest was piqued. "What happened? Why is it so significant?" Sarah hesitated, then sighed. "The house has a dark history. A long time ago, there was a tragic event. A young girl disappeared, and it was believed she had fallen into the well. The search for her body was extensive, but they never found her. The case was eventually closed, but people say the well was cursed." Emily's heart sank. "A girl? Do you know anything more about her? What happened to the family who lived there?" Sarah shook her head. "The family moved away shortly after the disappearance. No one really knows what became of them. Some say they were driven away by the grief and the strange occurrences that followed. The well has a reputation, you see. People say it holds the spirits of those who have met a tragic end." Emily's mind raced as she absorbed the information. The whispers from the well now seemed to take on a new significance. The idea that they might be connected to the tragic story of a missing girl sent chills down her spine. "Thank you for telling me," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I appreciate it." As Emily walked back to her house, the weight of the revelation settled heavily on her shoulders. The whispers were no longer just an unsettling sound. They were a link to a tragic past, a haunting presence that seemed to grow more insistent with each passing day. When she returned home, Mark was in the middle of working on some repairs in the kitchen. His focus was absorbed in fixing a leaky faucet, and he didn't notice Emily's troubled expression. "Everything okay?" Mark asked, glancing up briefly. "Not really," Emily admitted, her voice shaky. "I talked to Sarah. She told me about the history of the house, the girl who disappeared, and the stories about the well being cursed." Mark put down his tools and turned to face her. "Emily, you can't let these old stories get to you. It's just folklore, nothing more." "But the voices," Emily started, but Mark cut her off. "We've been here less than 2 weeks. We're still adjusting. Maybe it's just your mind playing tricks on you." Emily felt a pang of frustration. "I know what I heard. The voices are real. They're getting clearer, more persistent." Mark sighed and walked over to her. "Look, I'll go outside and check the well. If it makes you feel better, I'll see if there's anything unusual." Emily watched as Mark headed toward the backyard. She felt a flicker of hope that perhaps seeing the well up close would dispel her fears. But deep down, she knew that the whispers were more than just noises. They were a call from the past, a reminder of something that had been buried but never forgotten. As Mark approached the well, the air grew colder, and the whispers seemed to swell, becoming a soft, mournful lament that echoed in the stillness of the backyard. Mark peered down into the darkness of the well, but he could see nothing except the deep, inky blackness. "There's nothing here," Mark called out, his voice echoing back from the stone walls. "Just a lot of debris and stagnant water." Emily joined him, her face pale and eyes wide. "I know what I heard. It's not just debris. It's something alive." Mark put a comforting arm around her shoulders. "Let's go inside. We'll talk more about this in the morning. You're probably just tired." As they walked back to the house, Emily felt a gnawing sense of dread. The relationship she shared with Mark was beginning to fray under the strain of their new environment. His rational explanations did little to comfort her, and her growing obsession with the voices was creating a rift between them. The night brought no relief. Emily lay awake in bed, listening to the whispers as they grew louder, more demanding. She could almost make out the words, though they remained elusive. The voices seemed to be pleading, crying out for help, or perhaps seeking retribution. Mark slept fitfully beside her, his occasional mutterings revealing the stress of their situation. Emily's thoughts churned with fear and frustration, her mind caught between the haunting voices and the fading comfort of her husband's skepticism. As dawn approached, Emily was left with a profound sense of unease. The house, with its dark past and ominous well, seemed to be closing in on her. The whispers were no longer just a curiosity. They were a constant presence, a reminder of a tragic history that refused to remain buried. The growing rift between Emily and Mark, fueled by her obsession and his disbelief, threatened to unravel the fragile fabric of their relationship. As the couple faced another day in their haunted home, they knew that the whispers from the well were only the beginning. The true nature of the darkness that lingered in their new home was yet to be revealed, and the echoes of the past would not be silenced so easily. Emily's quest for answers had only just begun, and the well's secrets were waiting to be uncovered, one chilling revelation at a time. Chapter 3. The Hidden Truth. As the days wore on, the whispers from the well became increasingly unbearable. Emily's obsession with the voices grew stronger, and her nightly dread cast a heavy shadow over the couple's daily life. Mark, though still skeptical, could no longer ignore the toll the unsettling phenomenon was taking on their marriage. One rainy afternoon, while they were sifting through the attic in search of old photographs and forgotten heirlooms, Emily stumbled upon a dusty, leather-bound journal. It was wedged behind a stack of old trunks, its cover worn and cracked with age. She pulled it out carefully, her fingers brushing off layers of dust. "This might be worth looking at," Emily said, her voice tinged with hope. Mark glanced up from sorting through a box of old linens. "What's that?" "It's an old journal," Emily replied, flipping through its yellowed pages. "It might have belonged to someone who lived here before us." As Emily read through the entries, her eyes widened in disbelief. The journal was filled with frantic scrawls and disturbing notes. The previous occupants had also reported strange occurrences centered around the well. Descriptions of eerie voices and unexplained phenomena mirrored Emily's own experiences. One entry in particular caught her attention. "The voices are growing louder. They come from the well, calling us. I fear the well holds something dark, something we do not understand. I must find the hidden room. It's the only way to uncover the truth." Emily's pulse quickened. "Mark, look at this. It seems like the previous residents were dealing with the same thing. They even mention a hidden room." Mark, now more intrigued, set aside his skepticism. A hidden room? Where could it be? The journal offered a cryptic clue, a reference to a forgotten corner of the house where shadows dance and secrets lie. The description was vague, but it hinted at a location in the house that had been overlooked. The couple spent the rest of the afternoon searching the house with renewed determination. They inspected every nook and cranny, from the musty basement to the creaky attic, but found nothing out of the ordinary. It wasn't until late that night, as they were about to give up, that Emily noticed a peculiar draft coming from behind a large, faded tapestry in the hallway. The tapestry depicted a pastoral scene, its colors muted by years of neglect. Emily tugged at the fabric, revealing a hidden door set into the wall. "Mark, look!" Emily's voice trembled with excitement and fear. Mark's eyes widened. "I think we found it." With a groan of rusty hinges, the door creaked open to reveal a narrow, dimly lit stairway leading downward. The air was thick with dust and an unsettling chill. They descended cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the narrow space. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a small, hidden room. The walls were lined with shelves cluttered with odd artifacts and ancient tomes. In the center of the room was a large, wooden table, covered in strange symbols and what appeared to be remnants of occult rituals. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she approached the table. The surface was littered with old candles, dried herbs, and a large, tattered book bound in black leather. The book's cover was embossed with a symbol that matched one they had seen in the journal. Mark picked up the book and opened it, revealing pages filled with more cryptic symbols and dark incantations. The text was written in a language they didn't recognize, but the overall tone was unmistakably sinister. "This looks like some sort of ritualistic material," Mark said, his voice hushed. "It's connected to the well, that's for sure." Emily's eyes darted around the room, taking in the unsettling details. "I think they were performing rituals to communicate with or control whatever is in the well. It seems like they were trying to harness its power." As they explored further, Emily found a small, hidden compartment in the wall. Inside, she discovered old photographs and letters detailing the tragic fate of the house's previous occupants. The documents spoke of a family who had become obsessed with the well, driven mad by the voices they heard. The final entries were filled with desperate pleas for help and mentions of a dark force that had taken hold of them. The revelations were chilling. The well wasn't just a source of eerie noises, it was a focal point of dark, occult practices. The family's descent into madness and their attempts to control the well's malevolent force had left a lingering, malevolent presence in the house. As the couple emerged from the hidden room, the atmosphere in the house felt different, oppressive and charged with a growing intensity. The voices from the well grew louder and more aggressive, their once soft murmurs now a cacophony of angry, anguished cries. Emily and Mark struggled to maintain their composure as the whispers began to seep into every aspect of their lives. The voices seemed to follow them, becoming more insistent and invasive. They heard them in the middle of the night, during mundane tasks, and even during moments of supposed tranquility. The house was no longer a place of refuge, but a battleground between them and the unseen forces. The once benign whispers had transformed into harsh, commanding tones, driving Emily to the brink of exhaustion. She found it increasingly difficult to concentrate on anything other than the voices that seemed to encroach upon her every thought. Mark, too, was affected. though he remained in denial. His skepticism began to waver as the phenomena grew more disturbing. The emotional strain between the couple intensified. Emily's fixation on the well and the dark history of the house created a chasm between her and Mark. Their arguments grew more frequent, fueled by fear and frustration. Mark's rational explanations were becoming less convincing as the reality of the supernatural presence became undeniable. One night, as the voices reached a crescendo, Emily broke down. She clutched the journal and the book they had found, seeking solace in their pages, hoping to find answers or a way to end the torment. Mark stood by, feeling helpless and haunted by the same fears that plagued his wife. The house, once a symbol of their new beginning, had become a prison of fear and despair. The echoes from the well, now a relentless barrage of torment, seemed to mock their attempts to understand or escape the darkness that enveloped them. In the growing chaos, the couple found themselves grappling with the hidden truth of their ancestral home. The well's malevolent presence was not only a source of fear, but a reflection of the deep-seated darkness that had claimed the lives of those who had come before them. As the voices continued their relentless assault, Emily and Mark were left to confront the true nature of the evil that lay beneath their feet, and the terrifying possibility that their own sanity might be the next casualty in the house's long history of suffering. Chapter 4: The Haunting Escalates. The atmosphere in the house grew increasingly oppressive with each passing day. The once innocuous whispers from the well had transformed into a relentless cacophony that invaded every moment of Mark and Emily's lives. The haunting had escalated beyond mere sound. It had begun to manifest in their everyday surroundings, turning their new home into a house of horrors. Mark's nights were plagued by vivid, nightmarish visions. Shadows twisted and writhed in the dark corners of his vision, often taking on grotesque forms that seemed to leer at him with malevolent intent. During the day, these disturbing images lingered in his mind, making it difficult to distinguish between reality and nightmare. He would catch glimpses of figures moving just out of sight or hear a sudden whisper in the breeze, heightening his sense of dread. Emily, on the other hand, was consumed by an obsession with the voices. She spent hours in front of the well, her face pale and her eyes wide, as if hoping to decipher some hidden message from the chilling murmurs. Her obsession began to affect her daily routine and her interactions with Mark. Conversations turned into frantic discussions about what the voices might be trying to convey. To her, the voices were more than just sounds. They were a desperate plea for help or a warning of impending doom. One particularly harrowing night, Mark awoke to find himself standing by the well, his heart pounding in his chest. The voices seemed to be directly in his ear, their words a garbled, urgent plea. He stumbled back to bed, his mind racing. His rational mind struggled to make sense of these experiences. But the fear in his eyes betrayed his growing terror. Realizing that they could no longer cope on their own, Emily and Mark decided to seek outside help. They contacted Gerald O'Neill, a psychologist known for his unconventional methods and interest in the supernatural. Gerald had a reputation for tackling cases that defied logical explanation, and his experience in dealing with such matters made him the ideal candidate to help them understand their plight. Gerald arrived at the house one afternoon, his presence bringing a faint glimmer of hope to the beleaguered couple. He was a tall man in his late 40s, with a calm demeanor and an air of quiet authority. His arrival was marked by an immediate shift in the house's energy. The whispers seemed to grow louder, as if reacting to his presence. After a thorough examination of the house, Gerald began his investigation. He conducted a series of interviews with Mark and Emily, probing into their experiences and emotions. He listened intently to their accounts of the supernatural disturbances, taking detailed notes and asking probing questions. As the investigation progressed, Gerald decided to perform a series of tests and experiments. He set up recording equipment around the well and throughout the house, hoping to capture any anomalous sounds or occurrences. He also used various methods to analyze the energy in the house, including electromagnetic field, EMF readings, and temperature measurements. The results were unsettling. The recordings picked up not only the faint whispers, but also unexplained noises and fluctuations in the electromagnetic field near the well. Gerald's analysis suggested that the well might be acting as a conduit to something malevolent, a portal of sorts that allowed an otherworldly presence to interact with the physical world. One evening, as Gerald reviewed the data, he sat with Mark and Emily in the living room. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation and fear. Gerald's expression was serious as he addressed the couple. "There's a significant amount of anomalous activity centered around the well," Gerald said, his voice low. "The data suggests that the well could indeed be a portal, a gateway to something that shouldn't be here. The disturbances you're experiencing are consistent with accounts of entities trying to cross over or make contact with the living." Emily's eyes widened with both fear and a sense of vindication. "So, you believe the voices are real? They're not just in our heads?" Gerald nodded. "It's not uncommon for entities to use such portals to communicate or exert influence. The intensity of the voices and the phenomena you're describing align with cases where an entity is trying to establish a connection with the living." Mark looked at Gerald, his skepticism melting away in the face of this new revelation. "What can we do? How do we stop this?" Gerald took a deep breath. "There are several approaches we can take. We can attempt to close the portal or mitigate its effects, but it will require a combination of psychological and ritualistic measures. We'll need to perform a cleansing ritual and strengthen the house's defenses against further disturbances." The couple's fear reached new heights as the voices became increasingly aggressive. They began to interact with their surroundings in disturbing ways. Doors slammed shut on their own, objects were hurled across rooms, and strange, shadowy figures appeared in the corners of their vision. The house seemed to be alive with malevolence, responding to their every move with hostility. One night, as they prepared for the cleansing ritual, the disturbances reached a terrifying climax. The house was filled with a cacophony of screams and cries. Emily was overcome by an intense sense of despair, while Mark struggled to keep his composure. They could hear the voices clearly now, angry, accusatory, and demanding. The entity seemed to be growing stronger, its influence spreading like a dark stain over their lives. Desperate to escape the mounting terror, Emily clung to the hope that the ritual would bring some relief. Gerald began the cleansing ceremony, his voice chanting ancient incantations and his movements deliberate and precise. The house trembled as the ritual progressed, the oppressive energy reaching a peak before gradually beginning to dissipate. The experience left Mark and Emily physically and emotionally drained. The voices, though still present, seemed to retreat to a more distant and less intrusive level. Gerald assured them that the worst of the activity had passed, but the couple knew that the house was forever changed. The well, with its dark secrets and malevolent presence, remained a part of their lives, a constant reminder of the supernatural forces that had intruded upon their home. As they struggled to regain a sense of normalcy, Mark and Emily were left to confront the lasting impact of their experiences. The haunting had tested their relationship and their sanity, revealing the true extent of the darkness that lay beneath the surface of their seemingly idyllic new home. The echoes of the past continued to resonate, a chilling reminder of the malevolent force that had sought to claim their souls. Chapter 5: The Final Confrontation. The air in the house was thick with an impending sense of doom. Despite the temporary reprieve following Gerald's cleansing ritual, the whispers from the well had returned with a renewed vigor, their tone now unmistakably malevolent. Emily, driven by desperation and a newfound determination, embarked on a relentless quest for answers. What she discovered was both shocking and horrifying. Late one night, Emily sat alone in the attic, surrounded by the scattered remnants of the old journal they had found earlier. She pored over its yellowed pages with renewed fervor, her eyes scanning the faded ink for clues. As she deciphered cryptic passages and pieced together fragmented notes, a pattern began to emerge, one that painted a chilling picture of the house's dark past. The journal revealed a series of disturbing events. Previous occupants of the house had reported similar disturbances, but they had been largely dismissed or ignored. It became clear that the voices were not just echoes of a bygone era. They were the anguished cries of those who had suffered grievously and were now trapped in a cycle of torment. The well, it seemed, was not merely a source of supernatural activity, but the focal point of their suffering. Emily's hands trembled as she read the final entries of the journal, which described the spirit's desire for vengeance. These were not just lost souls seeking peace. They were angry, wronged, and determined to make their pain known. The well had become a conduit for their anger, amplifying their cries and drawing them closer to the world of the living. With this horrifying revelation in mind, Emily knew that they could no longer ignore the threat. She and Mark had to confront the source of the voices directly, despite the terror that it inspired. They decided to take action and face the malevolent entity linked to the well, hoping to bring an end to their suffering. On a stormy evening, the couple prepared themselves for the confrontation. The wind howled outside, and rain battered the windows, adding to the sense of foreboding. Armed with a mixture of hope and dread, they descended into the backyard, their steps heavy with the weight of their resolve. The well stood before them, an ominous and silent sentinel. As they approached, the whispers grew louder, more frantic. The well seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, as if it were alive and aware of their presence. Mark and Emily exchanged a determined glance and began their preparations, setting up protective symbols around the well and reciting incantations from the journal. The moment they began their ritual, the ground beneath them trembled. The whispers erupted into a cacophony of wails and screams, a dissonant symphony of anguish that seemed to emanate from the very depths of the well. The air grew cold, and the shadows around them danced with a life of their own, twisting into grotesque forms. Suddenly, the well seemed to exhale a thick, dark mist, and a figure began to materialize from the shadows. It was a ghastly, spectral form, its features distorted and obscured by an aura of malevolence. The entity's presence was overwhelming, a palpable force of darkness that pressed in on them from all sides. Emily's heart raced as she recognized the figure as the source of the voices, the entity that had been tormenting them. It was a presence fueled by centuries of pain and rage, and it was determined to make its grievances known. The entity's eyes glowed with an unearthly light, and its voice echoed with a mixture of fury and sorrow. "You have trespassed upon our domain," the entity intoned, its voice a hollow whisper that reverberated through the night. "We seek justice for the wrongs done to us, and you cannot deny us our retribution." Mark and Emily stood their ground, despite the terror that gripped them. They knew that the only way to end the torment was to address the spirit's grievances and attempt to bring them some measure of peace. With steely determination, they continued their ritual, reciting the ancient incantations with unwavering resolve. As they spoke the final words of the ritual, the mist around the well began to swirl violently, and the entity let out a bone-chilling scream. The ground beneath them shook, and the air was filled with an oppressive pressure that seemed to crush their spirits. Emily and Mark held on, their voices resolute as they invoked the protective symbols and called for the spirits to find peace. In a climactic burst of energy, the entity lunged towards them, its form distorting and shifting as it attempted to break free from the constraints of the ritual. The couple felt a surge of intense fear and pain, but they pressed on, their voices rising in a final, desperate plea for resolution. The battle between light and darkness reached its zenith as the well's energy erupted in a blinding flash. Mark and Emily shielded their eyes, their bodies trembling from the sheer force of the supernatural struggle. When the light finally subsided, the well was eerily silent, its oppressive presence seemingly dissipated. Breathless and exhausted, Mark and Emily looked at each other, their faces pale and drawn. The entity had vanished, leaving behind only the faint echoes of its tormented cries. The house felt different, the weight of its dark history lifting slightly as if a great burden had been removed. But the victory came at a cost. As they retreated from the well, they realized that their ordeal had left its mark on them. The haunting had tested their endurance and their relationship, revealing the true depth of their strength and commitment to one another. The personal sacrifice they had made, facing their deepest fears and confronting the malevolent entity, had brought them closer together, but it had also left them scarred. As they stood by the now quiet well, Mark and Emily reflected on the harrowing journey they had endured. The echoes of the past lingered in their minds, a constant reminder of the darkness they had faced and the strength they had summoned to overcome it. Their home was forever changed, but they had found a semblance of peace amidst the lingering shadows of their struggle. In the end, the well remained a silent witness to the supernatural forces that had once plagued their lives. Mark and Emily's confrontation with the darkness had brought an end to the torment, but it had also left them with a profound understanding of the power and mystery that lay beneath the surface of their seemingly ordinary world. Chapter 6: The Echoes Fade. The days that followed the confrontation with the malevolent entity were marked by an unsettling quiet. The once agitated whispers from the well had ceased, leaving an eerie stillness in their wake. Mark and Emily Thompson found themselves navigating a home that, though outwardly calm, was forever altered by the trials they had endured. As they walked through the house for the final time, the atmosphere was heavy with a mixture of relief and melancholy. The once turbulent well stood in the backyard, now a mere relic of the darkness that had pervaded their lives. It seemed to have returned to its innocuous state, but the couple knew that its silence was only a deceptive calm. The final decision to leave the house was not made lightly. It had been their home for months, a place where they had hoped to build a life together. However, the scars left by their experiences were too profound to ignore. The house, though no longer haunted, was a constant reminder of the supernatural horrors they had faced. Packing up their belongings was a somber task, each object a reminder of the tumultuous journey they had endured. Emily lingered in the attic, her eyes tracing the outline of the old journal that had revealed so many truths. The pages were now folded and packed away, but their impact was permanent. She remembered the fear, the anger, and the moments of desperation that had accompanied their investigation. It was a journey that had tested their relationship and their resolve, pushing them to confront their deepest fears. Mark, too, grappled with the aftermath of their ordeal. The terror they had faced was more than a haunting. It had been a profound confrontation with the unknown. The experience had left him questioning the boundaries between reality and the supernatural. As he boxed up the last of their belongings, he couldn't shake the feeling that the well might still harbor some of its dark essence, even if it was no longer active. With a final look at their home, Mark and Emily prepared to leave. The car was packed, and the house was eerily quiet, its former chaos replaced by a desolate calm. As they drove away, the landscape of the countryside blurred into the distance, the well disappearing from view but not from memory. The drive was filled with reflective silence. Emily stared out of the window, her thoughts a tangle of memories and emotions. The well had been more than a physical location. It had been a symbol of the unknown and the unseen. The dark presence that had once pervaded their lives was now a part of their past, but its impact lingered in their minds and hearts. As the couple settled into their new home, a small, tranquil cottage far from the echoes of their former life, they began the slow process of healing. The tranquility of their new surroundings was a stark contrast to the turmoil they had left behind. They hoped that this new chapter would offer them the peace and normalcy they had been yearning for. But even as they sought to move forward, the shadow of the well's influence remained. The memories of the entity's haunting whispers and the intense fear they had experienced were impossible to fully erase. They found themselves constantly glancing over their shoulders, haunted by the faintest sounds or movements that seemed out of place. On a particularly quiet evening, Emily sat alone in their new living room, a book in her lap, but her mind far from the pages. The calm was almost too perfect, too serene. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss, a sense of unease that settled over her like a heavy fog. It was as if the well's darkness had left a lingering residue, an echo that refused to fade completely. Mark joined her, sensing her unrest. He sat beside her, and together they contemplated their journey and its impact. The well, with all its malevolent force, had been vanquished, but the scars it had left on their souls were not so easily healed. The darkness they had confronted had tested their endurance and altered their perception of the world. As they sat in their new home, they were aware of a subtle, unsettling feeling, an impression that the well's dark presence might not have been entirely eradicated. The well itself had become a silent witness to their ordeal, its dark history now part of their story. It stood as a reminder that some mysteries remain unsolved, and some shadows never completely dissipate. The final scene closed with Mark and Emily embracing the tranquility of their new life, yet remaining ever vigilant. The echoes of the past might have faded, but the haunting had left an indelible mark on their lives. The well, though silent, continued to cast its long shadow over their memories. As the story drew to a close, the well's presence lingered in the background, a reminder of the darkness that had once pervaded their lives. The final hint that the well might not be entirely free of its sinister essence left a lingering sense of unease, a subtle reminder that even when the echoes fade, the shadows of the past can never be fully erased. Mark and Emily's journey had come to an end, but the echoes of their past remained, a haunting reminder of the darkness they had faced and the strength they had discovered within themselves.